American Republic, 4 of our presidents have been assassinated. There were attempts to assassinate at least 2 of them. The next president to be assassinated, which are never put into this context that I put it in, was James Garfield. And what I attribute to those who are now called the Secret Service is complicity. And historians have written it off, as usual, as a lone assassin. James Garfield, like Lincoln, wanted a united America, not beholden to the Brits. He opposed British domination, whether by trade, by the cotton fields, and so on. See, not enough historians point out that the Civil War was basically the British took advantage of a natural antagonism between the North and the South, and they wanted to split up the country so that we were no longer a United States of America. And the Brits had a great interest in the cotton fields because of their textiles. They were dominating, through a monopoly at the time, the textile field. And it was British warships that were running through the blockade to bring munitions to the South. The South was not an industrial power. Some of the Confederacy officials ended up in England, including the treasurer of the Confederacy, ended up practicing law in England. People, they dwell on the slavery issue. They say, well, Lincoln's freed the slaves. Those that study it carefully recognize he supposedly freed the slaves so that they could fight against the Confederacy.
Wasn't he actually quoted as saying that if he could win the war without freeing the slaves, he would do so?
That he could do what?
That if he could win the war without freeing the slaves, he would do so. I saw that quote.
He probably did. I don't want to get bogged down in all the nitty-gritty of the Civil War. I want to go over the bigger picture and then come back to Dallas and some things that we need to know. So James Garfield was assassinated with, contrary to the history books, with the complicity of the Secret Service. And remember something. The one who headed up what we now call the Secret Service, Lafayette C. Baker, according to the book The Lincoln Conspiracy, was part of the plot to assassinate Lincoln. It was in his diary in secret code, which came out.
Actually, Baker, I guess, he operated in what was then called,
Somebody sent me an email recently that says, when I went to college, we studied about the Secret Service, and Lafayette C. Baker is one of the great heroes of the Secret Service.
Oh, my God.
Where do you get this idea? I never heard of this book, Lincoln Conspiracy. Who the hell are you, and so on. No.
Yeah, he was at the Bureau of Detectives in the War Department, and now the Secret Service is connected to the Treasury Department, but back then he was War Department.
You know your subject, and therefore you know what I'm talking about. So with their complicity, President Garfield, who opposed the Brits, the other one that opposed too much trade with England, opening up our gates so that they could flood us with their products and take us over, was President William McKinley.
Yes.
He was against British dominating us through loaning money to the United States, the way President Garfield opposed them. And he likewise was assassinated, that history books say, a lone assassin did it. My viewpoint, based on everything I know, was it was another one of those, blaming it on the Lee Harvey Oswald of 1901.
One of the things that really sticks out in my mind from President McKinley was he had a speech that they called the Cross of Gold speech, and the line that I think is most famous is when he said, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold."
Well, that wasn't exactly his speech. That was the one that was running for some high office at that time. But anyway.
Oh, was that Bryan?
He was some way involved in what you're talking about. But now let's come on to the next thing. 1933. In the 30s, the law was different. A president was elected in November, but was not inaugurated until March. And that was an old law based on the time before they had cars, when they had to come from the hinterlands to Washington by horse, and they needed to allow more time. So During that period, the outgoing president, Herbert Hoover, kept trying to force President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt to agree to close the banks and save the banking industry from a debacle. And he says, no, I will deal with it after I'm inaugurated. So in February of 33, prior, about 2.5 weeks before he was actually inaugurated, a major bank in Detroit went under because Henry Ford says, I don't trust this bank, I'm taking out my money. And there was a danger that the banking system would collapse at that point. Within 24 hours, there was a plot to assassinate Franklin Roosevelt. Instead, the one sitting next to Roosevelt was actually assassinated, and he was the mayor of Chicago, Anton Cermak. Some have said, well, it was really a plot against Cermak because Cermak was in the beer smuggling business in opposition to Al Capone. I don't accept it. I believe that there may have been a plot to assassinate both of them, but since he was sitting next to Roosevelt, it's like the plot against Kennedy. I mean, they also got Connolly. I mean,
certainly,
in the open car. So I take that to be that was a plot against Franklin Roosevelt, the president-elect, within 2 weeks of